let's review guided reading. Hi everyone, welcome to Talk and Chalk. I'm Beck, and today I'm going to take you through what I do with kids during a guided reading session when they're actually with me. So if you've watched any of my other videos on the must do and can do activities, that's all very driven by the L3 training that I was doing last year. And those are the activities that the kids are doing independently while I'm working with a group of students. So today I'm going to take you through what I do with those students. And there's different names for it. Some people call it the engine room, it's at the jelly bean table, whatever it is, it's the targeted group of kids that is reading with the classroom teacher. So the stuff I'm going to share today isn't necessarily just the L3 stuff. Obviously that, guided a lot of what I was doing last year, but I found a lot of that stuff is the good practices that I've trained in over the years, dating right back to my uni days. I remember doing my first experience with guided reading was back at uni when we were studying literacy. So that's almost 16 years of experience now that I've had running different guided reading groups in different formats. And really L3 did have the best practices overall. And I just sort of tweaked different things to meet student needs. So remember, anytime I do these videos, I'm just giving you my tips and advice. These aren't the be all and end all of everything that you're going to do. You're going to find that some kids need different things, or that your school is taking a different approach if you've got different programs running. But these are the things that worked for me, and this is how I believe a good guided reading session is structured with your kids. So let's go through what you need to have in order to run a good guided reading session. So you really need to just have your kids explicitly set up. You need to have your resources ready, everything ready to go, so that when you're in that session with those kids, you're not getting disturbed. You need to train the kids to do this, and it takes a while to do that. This is what, week 5 now of the term, so you're probably only just now starting to get into the rhythm of things with your class, and that's fine. It's not meant to happen overnight. If you got things going straight away in week 1 or week 2, that's good, great, wonderful. If your kids still aren't getting it, don't stress. It takes time to do that. So hopefully the tips that I've got for you today might help you do that. So what I would do is I would have all of my books picked out the week before, and that's usually informed on the needs of the kids from that previous week. So, the first week that you're doing it, it's not going to be very well informed. You're kind of maybe going in a bit blind or using information from the previous year. This is week 5 now though, so you should be well versed with, where your kids are sitting at in terms of levels and abilities and hindrances to them progressing further and what your focus might be. So if you're using the continuum still, you might be using that. If you're moving on to progressions, you might be using that, or just following on from any benchmarking or running records that you may have from those students. So use those to guide what texts you pick, and that can be limiting depending on what texts you have in your school. I personally prefer the PM readers. The PM readers are are written so that you can guide those students properly throughout different reading skills, reading approaches, reading strategies. So I've just got some notes that I printed. So when you're looking through those levels, those lower levels, you're looking for, concepts of print and looking at captioning a text or a single idea, and looking at that repetitive structure that's there. And that's what they need at that level. That's what these readers are for. And that might seem boring. I guess technically it is. But guided reading is meant to be explicit instruction. That whole reading for enjoyment, reading for meaning comes in a different way. So when you're looking at things like quality texts, that's in your whole class instruction, your whole class modeling. It's when you pick up a random book to read for fun. It's your reading corner that you've got with lots of different texts in there for them to enjoy. That's your library session when you go to the library and they get to borrow any book that they want regardless of their reading level. So those other things still exist. We're not literally sucking the enjoyment out of reading by doing a PM book and reading in that guided reading session a PM book that they may not be interested in or necessarily engage with, because in that specific session with you, it's all about explicit instruction. It's all about targeting those needs, and that's the way you need to think of these readers, because we know they're not all the greatest books in the world. If you've ever read Sally's Beans isn't too bad. I suppose kids like gardening. But you know, Baby Bear, the Baby Bear books. There's so many Baby Bear books, but it's repetitive. They can make text connections. They recognize the character. It's a repetitive word. They know those things and they can start building on their strategies because of the fact that they've had that explicit instruction with those books that are designed in that way. So that's why they're good. So, you know, and then you go up through the levels and there's different things they look at. So then the text increases, the font gets smaller. All those things are normal. And kids will get tired as they go through the levels too, depending on how quickly they're doing it. So you've picked your text around all of those needs. You've got them ready to go. You need to make sure that you know that book well. And I've done a separate video on how to orientate a text. So I'll link that below. I'm not going to rehash that. Just know that you need to know the text properly. You need to know what keywords and things are in there, or those repetitive words that are in there, so that you can utilize that when you get to word work later on. So before kids read with you, they need to do a warm-up. Think of it like when you go to boot camp, you go for a run first to warm up your body. They need to have a warm-up first before doing that with you. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it, depending on the level and the ability and all that sort of stuff. The kids could go and do a familiar read away from you. So familiar reads, generally I like to have a pack of about 3 or 4 texts that they have already read before, PM texts that they've read with you before and they know well, because they should be able to sit down and independently read those just to themselves. That doesn't have to be out loud. They can just sit down and read it to themselves. Bit of a refresher. They can read it with a partner if you think they need it, or depends on how, you know, the structure works in your room. Another way to do that is for them to sit at the table and read their familiar reader at the jelly bean table, you know, as you get prepared for the session. And depending on the length of the book, they don't have to finish the whole book. It could just be a section of the book, a few pages, or, you know, if it's those lower level readers, they should be able to get through the whole thing. No more than 5 minutes if they're doing it with you, because otherwise it's just going to eat into your rotation. So that's why I always preferred having my kids do their familiar read first. So first thing in the morning, I don't even sit down and do the roll with them. They went and they did their familiar reader while I marked the roll. My kids were at that level and I had a good enough relationship with them that we didn't need to sit there and go, "Good morning, Mrs. West." Who does that in real life? That's why I don't do it in the classroom. Some kids need it. I'm not saying they don't. There's a lot of kids that need that kind of structure first thing in the morning. I was lucky. The cohort that I had didn't. So I didn't waste the time with it. So anyway, they do their familiar read for 10 to 15 minutes, and then that's when the reading rotations would start. So I say, the Harry Potter group, you come sit with me and read now. The rest of you are off doing your must-do, can-dos. This group is on Google Classroom. So they come and sit with me. They've already done their familiar read. My lower group, I would ask them to read a page or 2 of their familiar reader to me, so that I could get them to do an out loud practice, out loud warm up before reading the next book. So at the beginning of the week, that's when you do your orientation to the text. See other video. And then you can start with them, and this is where the explicit teaching comes into it now. So this is when the kids read, and I like getting the kids to do the choral read that they emphasize in the L3 strategies with the lower groups. With the older groups, I don't do it so much. When they're getting to that independent level, I don't do the choral reading necessarily as much. Sometimes I do to see how they're going. I know a lot of people don't like it, and I didn't like it at first either, doing choral reading, because essentially I guess it's copying, but it's really not, and it helps keep a good flow. So especially if you've got a group of 4 kids, which is the ideal number, really 4 is really all you want, but I know class sizes can be quite big, so you know, 5 or 6 where you can. And reading it all together, you might make it think that a group can only go as fast as its slowest reader. It's really not the case. Once you've done this practice for a while, you start to see that that's not the case. Those kids pick up, their fluency improves, and those kids that are quite fluent are good role models. Now, there are different levels within that group where you might have that kid that's, let's say they're reading at level 8 and they're reading slower, but you've got someone else that's an 8 and then it's faster. You need to look at what the target is for those kids that are on there and what discussion needs to happen, because sometimes you can have that general instruction and that learning intention of, today we're going to read like we're talking. We're going to make it sound like we are actually talking, not like a robot. That's the learning intention of the group today. That's what we're practicing. And we're practicing using expression. You need to say that to them clearly so that they know what they're focusing on when they're in that particular session. And again, comes down to student need. You guys need to target what your student needs are. And within that, that's when you're explicitly giving them strategies. So, for example, I had one particular student who was using the beginning of a word to try and decode, but was never looking at the end of it. So when it got to the end of the week, and I did running records every single week on every single student, and once you do it, you get used to it. It's a normal reading session. They're used to just me sitting there ticking a bit of paper. That was it. I'll do another video on how I did running records because that's a whole other thing. But either way, Thursday or Friday, whatever point it got to, I would be sitting there ticking away to do a running record, and then I could reflect with them and go, I could see every single mistake that you made today. You had the beginning sound correct, but not the ending sound. And then go through it explicitly and show them where they may have needed to do that. So then the next week, their learning intention was making sure they're tracking the whole word and saying the end of the word. Because we did that as a group, it became a group focus too. So when they partnered up, the other kids would know. And then when you're prompting during the reading, don't be afraid to do that. I don't know where this aversion has come from, where teachers suddenly think that they just need to keep waiting it out. Eventually they'll get it. No. Some kids need it. Some kids need you to go, that's ing on the end of the word. That word is walking, not walk. Otherwise they'll just stare at it, lose the context of the story. This is the part where you get to prompt them. At the end of the week, if they're still stuck on it, that's when you should be saying to them, have you said the whole word? Can you look at the picture? You know, those sorts of things. You can get very explicit about what it is that they need to do during this process. Because when they get to it, being a familiar reader, they've already gone through that explicit process with you. You've given them all of the specific steps and tools and structures that they could use to figure out what that word could be. And this is where things get different. You know, there's, oh, now I'm going to have a mind blank on it. There's all the charts that you can get that say, you know, stretch and chunk and all that sort of thing that you can use. And some of those older things work. Just depends on your kids' needs. I've had kids absolutely stuck on levels before. And you know what worked with them? When I pulled out an old 1970s Fitzroy reader and we practiced the cat sat on the mat. Yes, it's old-fashioned, but it was targeting student need. I'd tried all the other methods and nothing was working. So I went for a ye old one and it worked. And they got to the point where they were catching up to their cohort and were able to access those other texts, the PM texts, the quality texts. So don't be afraid to use some of those older methods. I'm not that old. That was me reflecting. I was born in 81, people. Okay, responding after the text. So looking at the meaning of the story. Now, you may not finish the whole text in one session. It may take you, 2 days to cover it, depending on what level you're at. I know some of those like 14, 15 level books, that's kind of a weird area. The 12 to sort of 16 texts there, they feel really long. And I think it's because the kids have made that jump into those higher level texts. And it is harder. There's more text. It's a bit smaller to read. Sometimes they put the text on top of a picture, which can be a bit confusing. And this is around the level that I find you'll identify other issues. So these are the levels where you start to see kids that need glasses that hadn't needed them in the past, because now it's a different font, it's a different size, it's a different color background. Kids, with Erlen's or dyslexia or something like that, they'll start to show signs of that around this level too, because they're around that age, they're around that level when the books are changing. And this is then when their eyes need to work differently. So if you've suddenly got a kid that's hit a standstill and you don't know why, go to the learning support team, put in a referral, talk to your counselor, talk to the coordinator, check if they've had their eyes tested, and ask if there is a concern with the optometrist for them to see a behavioral optometrist. I know it's not often recommended by people, but I've had kids in the past get diagnosed with it, get glasses, and then they've been fine. So the worst they can say is no, there's no problem. That's not the worst they could say, but in terms of you knowing what to do, that's the worst thing that they could say is no, I have no idea, deal with it. So, sorry, with the meaning of the story now, that's where I was up to. So talking about that content. And I really like using the, what are they called? The roles, the 6 roles. So you've got the predictor, you've got the, seriously, I didn't write this one down. Whatever they are, I'll link them. I'll find them and I'll link them because I found some really good ones. And the kids get to play this role in the story, in the reading, where they have to do those things. So someone's a questioner, someone's a summarizer, now I'm remembering them, someone's a predictor, and they do these different things throughout. And those are the higher level groups that you've got. So you're not necessarily going to do that, with your kindy group that's reading a level 3 PM reader. But you want to talk about the meaning of the story. So these are, your hidden head type questions that you can get into, where's an answer where I can see it? A question where you can see the answer, a question where the answer's in your head, and a question where you've got to infer. And the infer ones are obviously always the more difficult one. And then teaching after the reading, so that other feedback. So sometimes you might have the feedback immediately as they're going through. Sometimes the feedback might wait till the end of that reading time that you've got with the kids. And that's fine. It doesn't matter which way it is, as long as you're giving them a variety of different feedback, and that it's targeted feedback, it's explicit, and it's based on the learning intention and success criteria that you set for them for that reading session or for the week that you've got them for. There's it's good to give them feedback on something that wasn't targeted. So for example, wow, you're really reading with really good expression today. That wasn't even something we were focusing on. I'm glad you're doing that. But making sure you're still giving the feedback on the thing that you were asking about. Okay, word work. This is the icing on the cake. This is the cherry on top, the word work. You can't just read, do your questions, and then say, okay, off you go. You've got to do some word work to go with it, because this is where you start to get into that reciprocal reading process where it's going to transfer into your writing. If you can read, you can write. If you can write, you can read. That's what you want your kids to know. That's what they need to learn. So, word work, the language from word work is driven from L3, but this doesn't change the concept that you do a language activity or a word activity, spelling activity, that horrible word, spelling, after something they've done. And this is only 5 minutes. So you've done a few minutes of orientation with the kids, you've done some reading with some explicit teaching, and now you're getting to the word work. So this is like a 20-25 minute session tops. If you really want to go in deep, or it's going to take time, or you've got to do with behavior or whatever, it might stretch to half an hour. But really, you're time poor as a teacher. You don't necessarily have half an hour for every group that you've got, and it's not going to work that way. So word work is when you're taking something from the book and then applying a strategy to it, or a spelling generalization. Don't like to call them spelling rules, because then we're breaking the rules, aren't we? We know that those spelling rules always have a way to be broken. So a spelling generalization. So think of your littlies. In L3, it was called red work, because it matched the red PM levels, which is 1 to 5, I think. You might do something like you'll have a book that has the word look in it, because look is used a lot. That's one of our keywords. And you might you'll ask them to find it, and say, show me the word look, point to the word look, who can find look, can you see it again, can we turn to a different page and find the word look, oh, you found it, you found it, you found it. And yes, there will be that kid that's going and looking at everyone else and pointing. That's fine, let them have that process. If you're at boot camp, you'd be watching someone else do those star jumps, wondering why they're doing it differently to you, and then you would copy, and then you figure out why. It catches on. Let them have that thought process. If they're doing that constantly and never, ever, ever doing it themselves, then you need to do something different. Give them a couple of days, because eventually they'll be pointing it to themselves. But then you might say, now I want you to make it. So you're going to get some magnetic letters out, and you say, make the word look. And they get them out. You should have these prepared beforehand, so you're not searching for letters. So I would have LOOK 4 or 5 times already, ready to divvy it out to them. I like to get the little, what are they called? Little plastic containers from the reject shop. You can buy a pack of 4. You can see them in my must do can do videos for the anagrams. I do the same thing. Have them in there, ready to go. And then the kids get to make look, put it out, and then you get a whiteboard marker and a whiteboard, and you write the word look. That's great. Can you make the word looks for me. And they add the S. The idea being that they shouldn't be remaking look, they should just be adding the S. Can you write looks for me? Good. Rub it off. Can you make look again? Take the S away, write look, put it away. And then I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to trick you now, and I'm going to take all the magnetic letters away. Who can write look for me? Very good. Who can write looks? And pay attention to the fact that they're just adding the S, not rewriting looks, because they should just be going, I know that the only difference between look and looks is an S. And I have lots of cheat sheets for word work. So if you want them, just drop me a message. I'll email them to you. And then as you get through it, you know, the higher levels, they're doing different things like rhyming. So you might, what was one that I did? I read The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. That's a good story, great quality text. But there's the word light, night, sight in the text. And some of it is even on the one page. So I'd say to the kids, right, who can find light? Point to it. Who can find night? Point to it. Who can find sight? Point to it. Right, here's the magnetic letters. Make it. Write it. You want to take it away. Now, can you turn light into night? Not using the magnetic letters, just writing down. They should be wiping away one letter and replacing it with the other letter. And if someone wipes off the whole thing and rewrites it, I'd be like, why did you rewrite the whole thing? That's a waste of time. You only need one extra letter, one different letter. And then start that, you know, explicit teaching of, is it a whole new word, or is there just a new sound? Is there a new blend? What is it that makes it different? And then go from there. And that's your word work. That's the end of your session. And then they go. And you might have activities out on the table where they could use words from word work out there in their must-do, can-do activities. So there might be a thing on the floor, if you've seen my other ones, that it's a Bogle game. And it might say something like, make 5 words from your book this week. And those kids would go back and make light, night, sight, and do that over there. And it ties in, and I might have it in Google Classroom as well. Some of those, you know, like word family type activities that are online, they might use those words to do that as well. So really all you need to remember having about a really good guided reading session is know your text, have all your resources prepared to go, have your must do, can do activities set up and ready to go so they don't need to disturb you. Some teachers like to wear a special beanie or a scarf, and when you're wearing it, you don't interrupt the teacher. There's, you know, she's reading. He's reading, she, whatever. And that when you've got them familiar, make sure familiar is done in some way, orientate. And if it gets to Wednesday and it's a book you've read twice already, you might say to them, what's the book about, guys? That's your orientation. Remember what we're doing. Let's read. And they read, and it could be in choral or singularly, depending on what your level kids are doing, what they're up to, what their abilities are. Read, explicitly teach, and give feedback, get into word work. And that's your whole session done. And really, if you do it like that consistently, you should see improvement in your kids. And if you're not seeing improvement, that's when you need to be talking to your supervisor, learning support team, or your, if you've got an instructional leader, that's the person to talk to as well, and really target those needs. Now, your higher level kids shouldn't need to read with you every single day, especially if they're above the targets that you've set for that grade or that term or whatever it is you're looking at. Those kids that are working higher, they can be with you, you know, maybe 3 times a week is all they need to sit with you. They can easily go and sit with a partner and read independently and have great practice with that partner every single day. Or they could record themselves, and you can, you know, as a class you can go, let's watch so-and-so's video today. Those kids though, that are either just sitting below where they're meant to be or well below where they're meant to be, they should be reading with you every single day. Really, every single day. And if you've got ones that are extremely below, you need to try and find a way to get them into some buddy reading, some peer reading. If you've got a teacher's aide in there, an SLSO, get them to read with them, as well as reading with you, as well as reading their familiar readers, as well as participating in the class modeled and, you know, fun reading, as well as borrowing library books, as well as any opportunity you've got for them to read, whether it's audiobooks, whether it's on YouTube, watching video books on video. And they can do this in a fun way. It doesn't have to be a chore. Let them pick some of the text. That main time they've got with you during that guided reading session obviously is going to be the most vital time they have but they need as much exposure and practice to it as they possibly can. I've said this before, Will Smith said it, reading, or he said reading and running, but reading is the key to everything. It's the key to life. It really is. Reading is going to be what hinders them in any other facet of their learning. They might be a great Lego builder, but there's going to be some point where they need to read an instruction manual, or they need to write an instruction manual if that's what they want to do in life. Our kids need to learn to read. They need to love reading, and they're never going to love it if they can't do it or if they're falling behind the rest of their class. Kids know. We might not do it as much as we push our personal, that they strive towards their personal best. They know if they're behind the rest of the class, and I never want those kids to feel like they suck at something, especially reading. I can openly say I suck at soccer. I really, really do. But soccer isn't the key to life. I don't care if you love it. I'm not a soccer person. Okay, so if you want any of those things, the cheat sheets, if you want a sample of my planner, my weekly planner that I had for guided reading, I'm happy to share it. All my links and everything are below in the description. My Twitter, my Pinterest, Instagram, all that stuff. Send me a message on Facebook or Twitter with your email, and I will email you through any of those documents. I'm happy to help out with it. Remember, they're not all mine. They're things that have been shared with me over time. The only thing that would be mine would be like my own timetable. So this video is now gone for 26 odd minutes, so I hope it was helpful. If this was helpful for you, give me a thumbs up. If you have other strategies that you've used in the classroom that you think would be beneficial for other people watching, drop it in the comments below, because I'm sure they would love to hear it. I'm going to finish up there, so I'm going to put my button down here. If you want to subscribe for more videos, you just hover over that, click to subscribe. I'll chuck my book orientation video up the top here. That'll be easier for you guys, and I'll make one in the future on how I do running records. Thanks guys. Bye.